Hey, what's up, Raider Nation? It's finally time, the NFL Combine. We're going to get into everything that they kind of look for in a player and what's up with Fernando Mendoza. And of course, there's going to be lots of talk about Maxx Crosby. We'll get into all of that on today's episode.
Good morning, Raider Nation. The coaching hires have concluded, and for the most part, we're going to see what these guys do in evaluating the Combine. We'll talk about it next.
Is Mendoza going to throw? Is he not going to throw? Does it even matter? The scouting combine's here. I'm in Indianapolis, not in Studio Q, but we'll talk all about it. Let's get it.
Raider Nation, it's time. This is the Raiders Squad. Everything Las Vegas Raiders every week. Covering all the big hits and game-changing plays from the Death Star in the desert. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Commitment to excellence starts here. The Raiders Squad Show starts now.
Hey, what's up, Raider Nation? And remember, if you like the content, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. You can also follow us on our social media channels. You'll see on the screen if you're watching this on YouTube, or in the description below, the ways that you can connect with us. Also, just want to say thanks so much for rocking out with us. The show continues to grow. The channel continues to grow, and it's all because of your support. We do appreciate it. And remember, the Locked On Network is the #1 sports podcasting network. So once again, that is because of you, Raider Nation, and because of all your support. Coming up on today's show, in that fourth and final segment, Link and Q are going to be taking some of your questions and comments. We'll spend a little bit of more extra time today to get through all your questions and comments. So if you're watching this on YouTube right now, please drop them into the chat. In that third segment, obviously lots of Maxx Crosby talk. So that means everyone's talking about Maxx Crosby. And Shannon, Sharpe, and Chad Johnson were talking about it on the show, The Nightcap. And they kind of had some thoughts on what Maxx Crosby's value could possibly be. Also, we're going to get into the 2026 NFL Combine. As you see, Q is already set up in Indy. It's cold as hell there. He's pushing through, though, and he's going to give us, just the vibe that's going on there. And obviously, the guy's going to break down what everyone kind of looks for at the Combine, because sometimes it can be different. But as Link said, the coaching hires, they continue, and the Raiders are pretty much all set. And obviously, from the last time we had our episode, the Raiders did make some more moves. So just really quickly, Omar Young, running backs coach, over 17 years of coaching football in the NFL. He's been with the Pats, the Bears, the Packers, the Browns. Also, Maurice Williams, senior special teams. He's been in the NFL for about 10 years as well, and he was the special teams coordinator with the Falcons from 2021 to 2025, and also the offensive run game coordinator. And I'm going to apologize right now if I say his name wrong. Okay, Mario Jeberaeel. If that's wrong, Q, you can. I
think you got it. I think you nailed it. I'm not 100% sure, but I think you nailed it.
Okay, well, I hope so. Okay, that's a tough one, but nonetheless, this will be his 6th season coaching in the NFL, and of course, he previously was with the Jacksonville Jags as a defensive assistant. So he's going on the opposite side, which is really interesting. And Rick Dennison, O-line coach, and of course, he's a veteran coach. He's been in the league for over 30 years, and he was also the offensive coordinator for the Denver Broncos, Houston Texans, and Buffalo Bills. So that's a lot right there. Before we get into a full breakdown, really quickly, shout out to our sponsors. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Okay, so that was a lot. That was a lot of Shantelle early on the episode, right? Link, will go with you first. Just in terms of the coaching staff that the Raiders have currently put together, are there any names that kind of stick out to you? And just off the names that I mentioned right now, like a guy like Rick Dennison, what are your thoughts on him being the O-line coach?
Let's start there. O-line coach Rick Dennison has had the longest tenure probably out of this entire coaching staff in the National Football League. And one of the things I know that he's notable of doing is creating or working or masterminding that zone run concept.
Yep.
He did it with Clint. He did it with Gary Kubiak. He did it with other coaches around the league. And I've known him to utilize that. And we actually thought this was coming. When Clint got hired, knowing his history with his father, knowing what they've done in the past, Gary Kubiak did in his times of coaching and had a very successful career with the zone running game, we could embellish and see that it's probably going to happen. And that's exactly where all trails are leading to, especially with these recent coach hires. So I'm not surprised at all. I think you do need a veteran coach because, in all honesty, if you're going to create a zone run concept, and we know how much the offensive line is going to be a precedent or an importance this year in this offseason with the free agency, obviously with the draft, it's good to start out with a veteran coach. someone who knows what they're doing, and as you're pushing forward. So not surprised by it. Probably the biggest high. And again, I don't put in too much emphasis on titles.
Right.
So when coaches get these run game specialists, special teams assistant, look, you're a coach. You're going to be on the team. You know, the head coach, Clint Kubiak, is going to try to find a place for you to where you have some type of impression upon these young minds and these impressionable minds and all the people that you're working with in order to create a winner. But the Raiders have got a lot of catching up to do, because now this week is the combine. So that comes down to the evaluation. There's going to be pressure on these newly named coaches, along with the coaches that were already there, to create a team. Have your input, have your voice, to create a team. And it'll be interesting to see how John Spytek and the scouts do when it comes to this combine, because we really don't know overall, other than the most obvious positions, what they're critiquing and what they're looking for through this combine. And knowing how today's combine and these kids are, there are a lot of kids who don't test for the combine.
Right.
We'll talk about Fernando Mendoza in a little bit, not throwing, not a big surprise. I get it. The combine really is a waste, in my opinion. They should do away with it. Most of these guys have pro days at their school, which you're more comfortable with, which I was most comfortable with when I came out, because I was injured when I went to the combine back in my day. So I see it happening all over the place. The combine to me is just a time that we talk about. You know, we get a chance to chime in. But these days, guys, there are kids out there who know how to test for the combine.
Right.
And I have often said, film don't lie. So I turn on a film for a kid in college to see what he can do. Film don't lie. I have seen guys go to the combine that look like Tarzan but play like Jane. They test out like that. You know what I mean? They're phenomenal testing. They can bench the world. They can jump as high as anybody. You get them on a football field, they're completely lost. So I don't put as much emphasis in the combine as said some of these others, but it's sort of necessary evil for a lot of these coaches and a lot of these teams to get more medical evaluations, to get personality evaluations that you can't tell from film. So that's where it comes in.
Yeah, the medicals and the interviews are that's the important stuff here at the scouting combine, really, and that's when all these players are around, all these staffs, all at the same spot. You know, of course, you've got your top 30 visits. You can invite them into your building as well, but to have them all in the same area, to be able to talk with them, that's always a big deal. Being at the scouting combine as well is, it's a big deal when it comes to veterans that are currently on the team that could possibly be on the move. So there's going to be a lot of Maxx Crosby conversation going on this week here. That's when all these different GMs and folks get together at whatever the shrimp spot is. I forget, Prime, the steakhouse. I always forget the name of the other spot, but anyway, they all gather here and they start to have their conversations about where they're going to move, if a player is going to move or not. So there's a lot going on here at the scouting combine. It really just kind of gets started today, so it'll get busy later on this week. But I mean, Link, you hit it on the head. The medicals and the interview process is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, and obviously, I think the interviews are kind of important too for a guy like Fernando Mendoza, who's not going to be throwing, because he doesn't really gain anything from actually throwing, right? They're just going to criticize him even more, maybe find some holes in his game. So in terms of how important that interview process is going to be for a guy like Fernando Mendoza, do you think they put a lot of weight into that, Link?
Well, I mean, I'm sure they probably met with him in some capacity, one way or the other, prior to this. But I recall my day at the interview at the combine, and this was many moons ago. Different teams did different ways. I remember sitting in a chair in a room, in a dark room, with all the coaching staff around you, surrounding you, circled, just throwing questions at you. And I'm literally turning in a revolving chair, answering these questions to guys. I also remember, teams like the New York Giants that gave the Redskins at the time, now the Commanders, would put these goggles on you and have you toss beanbags like you're drunk and stuff like that. I mean, there were all kinds of different tests and interviews, but most notably, what I gathered from these days, general managers and team scouts get from combine, is they want to know what type of guy you are. They want to know if you're a team player, you're a good guy, you have a good attitude, or you're selfish into yourself. And a lot of teams don't want to bring those types of guys in their locker room because they want to create the headache. But I mean, it just depends on the team and the evaluation. When it comes to Fernando Mendoza, from everything that you've heard from interviews that he's done since they won the national championship, all through his years, if you can't gather enough information with that, then sitting down and maybe having a chat with him at the combine is probably all you really need, because I think the evaluation is already there. What else do you need to see? and him not throwing is not a surprise. Yeah, I agree with you, Shantelle. You don't want to hurt yourself. Don't want to do anything. Don't want to give anybody reasons to poke holes in your game. Oh, he can't throw the deep out, or he can't throw that. To me, the film don't lie.
Right.
You go in the film and go off of that. So I like I said, I think it's a surefire, foregone conclusion that he's number one overall to the Raiders. They need a quarterback. He fits the mold, and why not? It's a done deal. If anything, teams are trying to catch up with the evaluation to see what possibly they might want to make offers to the Raiders. That's yet to be seen.
Right, exactly. I mean, that when it comes down to it, man, I mean, you can't do any better than number one overall, and that's where Mendoza is going to go. So there's absolutely nothing he could do here at the Scouting Combine as far as on-field activities that's gonna do anything but hurt him. There's nothing he could do, right? I mean, you can't get any better than number one. So him throwing at his pro day and helping out his guys, some of his players as well, kind of showcasing them and have all these different teams come there to see him, that's going to help those guys. So, I mean, he's already solidified. The interview process, I'm sure, will be fun. He's the quirky guy, as we all know. So I'm sure that those conversations that they'll have behind the scenes are we won't hear any post interviews where they said, oh, he didn't ace the interview. Like, I guarantee he aces the interview. He's had plenty of media training. You could tell that already. So he'll do just fine. It's just a matter of dotting the I's and crossing the T's when it comes to Fernando Mendoza. But, remember, the Raiders have 10 draft picks, at this stage of the game. So it's not just about Fernando Mendoza. It's also about what cornerbacks are they looking at? What offensive linemen are they looking at? What defensive linemen are they looking at? What linebackers are they looking at in a very deep linebacker draft class? So, I mean, there's a lot to be gained from here. Like I said, all being in one location at the same time is something. It's just beneficial. And, I think the other thing to remember about the Combine is it should be able to check the box. It should be able to confirm what you already know. Like, I should be able to look at a wide receiver and say, man, he's really fast. Then he runs a 40, and I say, yep, that's what I thought. He was really fast. But if there's a guy that's not very fast on the football field and then he blazes a 40, because to Lincoln's point, there's guys that train for the Combine. There's guys that train to run the fastest 40 possible. Go back and look at the film. Wait, is he really that fast, or is he just that fast on the track? Because you ain't on the track on Sundays, right? You ain't on the track. You're on the football field. Can this guy beat coverage? Can this guy, you know what I mean? Like, or is he just a fast dude? So there's a difference between football fast and just track fast. And so you got to get the football fast guys, not the track fast.
But it's interesting because I feel like that can change your draft stock, right? Like, say if you run the 40 like really fast, they're like, okay, this guy might go a little bit higher. So there's those physical attributes that a lot of these scouts kind of look at. In terms of Fernando Mendoza, we talked about how he's not going to throw, how that could hurt him if he does. So there's no reason to. But when you go back and look at the tape, because as Link said, the tape will tell you everything. The tape does not lie. The fact that he has had a lot of starts in college and the fact that he has played against some great competition in the Big Ten, how much does that solidify him as a quarterback? And then if you've got a quarterback like Diego Pavia, who, maybe shines in the Combine, right? Do you think there will be some conversation about, hey, you know what? This quarterback looked really good. Maybe the Raiders should look at him, Link?
Absolutely. When it comes to scouting and this process that we're going through, and as we work our way up to the draft after the Combine, I have never seen so much shade thrown on players to try to downplay their ability or where their possible draft position. You have teams that get so almost like governments where they get clandestine and they try to create super spies. I'm gonna throw you off. Instead of drafting Shantelle Chand, I'm going to draft, Q Myers, and this is where we're going with our pick. So, I just think that Chantel's not what we thought she was going to be, and we don't want to pick her at that position. And you have all this stuff that's kind of thrown out there. So you have that shade that's thrown on players, but you're always going to have some pundit who are going to downplay the possibility of taking Fernando Mendoza number one. Well, maybe he doesn't run well, or maybe the RPL was whatever you want to come up with. To try to throw shade, to maybe downplay the overall incitement about drafting a player number one and what they could possibly do. When you have today's game, you don't have that Andrew Luck. You don't see that overall, oh, well, this is without a doubt. This is the number one pick in the draft. He should go top. Though we think it is Fernando Mendoza. I said it. Q said it. You said it. We think it is. And because the Raiders need a quarterback, it's a no-brainer. But like you said a moment ago, they also have 10 draft choices. Mm-hmm. So there are other things that they need to address. And now you have to get into that where you're looking to that possibility. Do you go with an offensive lineman in the second round? If so, what are you evaluating? What are you looking for? You want to run the zone scheme. And you have to improve this offensive line. And whether you want to do it through free agency or the draft, that's up to you. You have the ability to do that. But now, because everything is so condensed, everything is happening right now, this coaching staff is on a hot seat. For example, they just got hired. Now they got to evaluate and put a team together,
right?
Especially with the amount of free agents they had last year. So, I mean, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of evaluating to do. And depending on how you do it, if you rely on the combine, if you rely on the testing, and then you rely on that type of metrics, especially in these years of analytics, with AI playing a part in it, so be it. You're also on the line for that. We saw, Spytech and his staff draft a class last year. In my opinion, they didn't play most of that class.
Right.
So where are you evaluating those guys going forward? I think there's a lot of pressure on John Spytech and his crew to get it right with this number of picks, and also to be competitive in this division. That's asking a lot.
Yeah.
You got the Chargers, the Broncos, and the Chiefs, and you got three of the best teams. You got probably the most competitive division in football. You got to be able to keep up. You're coming off of a year with 3 wins. There is a lot of things that are focusing on this staff, recently hired and recently added, as well as this team building going forward. So there are a lot of things that have to happen in the next few months.
Yeah, and it really gets started here at the combine. And again, I mean, there's so many different parts and players that need to be evaluated, and so many different players that need to be added to this roster. This roster is going to look totally different than what it looked like in 2025. The Raiders have 25 draft picks, or 25 free agents, I should say. Sorry. So they have a lot of work to do. They're not going to re-sign a lot of those guys. So linebackers, I mean, I look at all those three. You look at E-Rob, you look at Jamal, you look at Devin. All those guys are all free agents, so they've got to do something there. Eric Stokes is a free agent, so they've got to do something there, right? They've got to obviously address the offensive line. That's something we talked about in great detail, right? Who's going to be running besides Maxx Crosby? There's so many different areas that they have to address, and so they're really going to get that process started, and they have to deep dive, into it, because look, they got started late, as Lincoln said, with Clint Kubiak being hired after the Super Bowl, so they're already behind the 8 ball. So now they're really playing catch up. I was on the plane yesterday with some of the Raiders here, so they're here already. They're ready to go. They're ready to get busy, but they've got a lot of work to do in a little bit amount of time. The no-brainer is that Fernando Mendoza will be the number 1 overall pick. It's who is going to be after him. What are they going to do with the rest of the draft class? Because last year's draft class was very underwhelming.
Yeah, and you know what? In terms of the quarterback class, because everyone's talking about how that's a little bit underwhelming, who will be at the combine: Ty Simpson, Carson Beck, Diego Pavia, Drew Aller, and Haynes King. That was your guy, Q. So we'll see how he kind of does. Yeah,
that's a late round pick right there. That's a late round pick. That's if you can't get your guy and you're looking for a guy to maybe hold it down and kind of play an Aiden O'Connell role. That's who Haynes King is. But yeah, the Raiders got Mendoza, so they don't have to worry about that.
Exactly. And this is just all, just to make it a little bit more interesting, because we will see them at the combine, and we may be talking about some quarterbacks after the combine, as, they might perform really well, run the 40 really well. So that always starts some conversation, but we're going to dive into some other players that the Raiders might be eyeing, some positional groups that the Raiders need to focus on as well. That's coming up on the other side. Keep it locked here on the Locked On Network. You're watching or listening to the Raiders Squad Show. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life. This year, TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day. With TurboTax Full Service, you can have your taxes done for you by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress or guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet up with a local TurboTax expert in person or contact them online. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file you last year, you just got to file by February 28th. So take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. Welcome back, Raider Nation. Remember, if you like the content, you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Thanks so much, by the way, for rocking out with us. And remember, in that fourth and final segment, Link and Q are going to be taking some of your questions and comments. So please drop them in the chat if you're watching this on YouTube. If you are listening to this, because you can find us on the audio side as well, you can always hit us up at a later time, and we may be able to get to some of your questions and comments on another episode. All right. So obviously, NFL Combine vibes. Everyone's been waiting for this because, Q, as you said, this is kind of the start of it. Obviously, all year long, they're scouting guys, but this is kind of the beginning of it, and we're going to hear so much. So in terms of positional groups, because we talk about the 10 draft picks, we pretty much know Fernando Mendoza is kind of that given, right? He's the best quarterback that's available in the draft. However, there are other needs that the Raiders really need, and there's a lot of holes on this team. Now, Link, I know where you might go with this, but the Raiders did draft a couple of guys for the O-line last year. I don't even think we really got to assess them because we didn't get to see them on the field too much. But once again, do you think the Raiders kind of look for, a couple of tackles or guys that can, maybe come in and hopefully give the Raiders something to be excited about on the O-line? Do you think that's an area that the Raiders will look at?
Yes, I do. And I think that it comes down to the fact of, comfort and and obviously who's available. You might be looking who's the best player available depending on how you do it. Now, I've always thought for general managers, there are two ways to draft. Either you draft your board as to what you expect to address the needs of your team, or you draft the best available player. A few years ago when the Raiders couldn't get their quarterback, they drafted Brock Bowers at 13. Well, I mean, they needed offensive line at the time, and JT and I remember we were doing the draft show in Las Vegas, and we said, "Oh, they're going to get an offensive lineman here." We thought they were going to go with an offensive lineman, and they did Brock Bowers. Now the rest is history. So it's anyone's guess on how SpyTech does it, and I think we'll be able to tell a lot more, not only from last year's draft but this year's draft when you combine the two. So those are the two philosophies. So now you're looking at, if you think that Fernando Mendoza is overall the number one draft choice, which we all agree, I think we unanimously agree he's going to go to the Raiders. Who's available at 36? Who's available at the rest of these positions?
Right.
Do you possibly trade back if there's a team that's offering you a mint to get more picks? However you want to do it. I've always said you don't go shopping until you see what you have in the cabinet, so you see what you need. We know what the Raiders need. But the Raiders need more than offensive line. I'm so passionate about the offensive line because that's what I did. The Raiders also need secondary help, as Q talked about. The Raiders, they need an alpha wide receiver. Do you draft speed or you draft route running ability? Because when Ruggs came out of Alabama, he was known as the most speediest of the receivers available, but wasn't necessarily the best route runner. So depending on what you're, drafting to help Mendoza as your quarterback, you might want to draft a route running receiver. So these are the intangibles that we will all sort of break down as we go along, this offseason after the combine and stuff like that. And as I said before, if guys test well at the combine, does SpyTech and the scouts get it all caught up in that? Oh, this guy ran a 4.4, 4.340, and he this type of thing. He bench pressed 225 54 times. I mean, Of course, I'm exaggerating to a degree, but how it comes down to the evaluation. So it's still a wait and see period. But I think we all agree on this panel, and we all agree here. The Raiders need more than one position.
Yes, in a major way. And look, I'll say this: they can't get caught up in the combine. If they get caught up in the combine, they're doing it wrong. It's just that simple. And, all due respect to the late, great Al Davis, obviously, the guy who made everything happen for the silver and black, but there was times that he got caught up too much in the combine and just the numbers. And you started to see guys to get drafted that had no business getting drafted. Remember Bruce Campbell? Remember that guy? Remember that? Yeah, exactly. I mean, at least he was a 4th round pick. But the point is, you can't fall in love with what you see in the underwear Olympics, which is what I like to call the scouting combine here in Indianapolis. You have to be able to confirm what you see, right? If you think that a guy is a really good football player and then he happens to test really well, okay, that's a bonus. Right. But don't just fall in love with all of a sudden what he does this week here in Indianapolis and ignore the tape that's already out there. Oh, the guy's a really fast wide receiver, but he can't catch. Well, guess what? If he can't catch, then there's no reason to draft him. Right. I mean, there's so many different scenarios, but you cannot fall in love with what you see at the scouting combine. There's a deep draft when it comes to linebackers. I keep going back to that because the Raiders need that. There's a deep draft when it comes to cornerbacks because the Raiders need that. There's a lot of it's a deep draft when it comes to defensive linemen, which is a good thing as well. This is one of these drafts that I don't think there's a ton of stars. I think there's a ton of starters, and that's fine because where the Raiders are, the position that they're in, and the 10 draft picks that they have as of right now, and I do believe that that's going to change. I do believe that you're going to see John SpyTech trade back a couple of times if what he did last year is any kind of proof of his tendencies. Remember last year he started out with 8 draft picks, ended up with 11. So I would not hesitate to think that he's going to probably trade back a time or two as well this year and get more draft picks because he knows that this team needs a lot of help. It needs a lot of bodies. This roster, I believe, is going to be very young this upcoming year. And if you need proof of what I'm talking about, go back to what they did in Tampa Bay, him and Jason Light, what they did there when Tom Brady and company left. all of a sudden they had to turn over a very veteran-heavy draft class team and make it very young, and that's what they're good at doing. Last year, we didn't get to see the draft class perform. That was probably more of a Pete Carroll thing than anything. I think John Spytek wanted to see his young guys go out there perform so he can go grocery shopping and know what he already has. And unfortunately, that wasn't done. So now they're playing catch up there too. So they got to figure out what they have and figure out also what they need.
Yeah, and the Raiders were able to draft a couple of guys last year as wide receivers as well, Thornton Jr. and, of course, Jack Besh. And, we didn't really get to see a lot of them either on the field. They got some opportunities, but, it was interesting because heading into the combine, I remember we had a conversation and Link, you were like, the Raiders maybe don't need to focus on getting a wide receiver in free agency. But one area that they can look at is in the draft. And one name that really pops out, obviously, is Elijah Sarratt. And you have that continuity with him and Fernando Mendoza. Do you think the Raiders will look at him in the draft? And how much does this combine kind of have an effect on anything? Because when you take a look at a wide receiver, what exactly are you looking for? You guys talked about being a route runner. Elijah Sarratt is a great route runner. He's a great vertical threat. He's got good ball skills. But do you think that's a guy that the Raiders might be like, hey, you know what? Let's pair him with Fernando Mendoza and let's just see how this goes. Link?
Depending on the price, because if you could recreate that chemistry that they had at, say, last year at Indiana, that would be notable. You have a quarterback who's familiar with the receivers. Look, no two receivers run the route the same. And in my experience, there are two receivers that run it down and out, and you can tell them you run 10 yards and break out. Some receivers cut it off at 8. Some receivers cut it off, run 11 in steps, and the timing is not there. So if you have that familiarity with the said receiver that Mendoza and Sarratt would have, especially coming back from Indiana International Championship run, that would be good. But also it has to make sense. Now it's a business. Even more so than it was in college, or that it evolved to in college. Now it's a business. Does it make sense? Can we get him? What's the price that we would have to pay to get him? Do we have to take him with that 36 pick?
Right.
Will he be there? You see what I'm saying? Should we trade up to get him? You see a lot of teams that jump at that fact. So, when it comes to the evaluation, Shantelle and Q, you look at it, needs, you address the possibilities. But yes, chemistry is something that you really cannot duplicate until it happens. I mean, every position, every player working with a new team has got to develop that chemistry, and it takes time to do that. So because the Raiders do need a primary receiver, an X receiver, in my opinion, yes, it would make sense for him to go after somebody that Fernando Mendoza is used to.
Well, and don't forget about Omar Cooper either. That's his other wide receiver there from Indiana, who's a hell of a pass catcher as well. He's got really good footwork. I think that either one of those guys could be really good options. I think that it would be smart for the Raiders to go after one of those guys just to have that familiarity with Fernando Mendoza to make things a little bit easier on him. But again, it all depends on when you decide that you want to go target him, right? There's been all kind of different discussions. If Elijah will go in the second round, if he'll go later, if he'll go a little earlier, it's all over. You know how it is at this stage of the game. It's all over the page. When it comes to where this guy's stock is and where his value is. So we'll have to pay attention to that. But yeah, it makes all the sense in the world. But at the same time, you can't compromise building the entire team just because you're trying to get one wide receiver. Again, this is a very deep wide receiver class. So even if you don't get an Indiana guy, you can still get a really good wide receiver. And oh, by the way, you still got two dudes that you're trying to figure out who were drafted last year early on. We're trying to figure out what they are as well. So there's a lot of different options that the Raiders have, a lot of decisions that have to be made.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of positional groups that the Raiders have to focus on. And you guys both mentioned that Spytek is probably going to try to get some more draft picks. He was very successful at doing that last year in last year's draft. Are there any other positional groups that you're looking at thinking the Raiders do have to get some more depth in this area, Link?
Linebacker, safety, safety, the corner. I mean, we go down the line everywhere. Everywhere. We talked about offensive line. We talked about wide receiver. I think they need to address that depending on what type of scheme you want to run, because it's a zone run scheme. You got to have good blocking tight ends. Brock Bowers has gotten better. Michael Mayer is probably our best blocking tight end that's on the roster. This list is wide and long, sis. Where do you want me to start? Where do you want me to finish? It goes everywhere. The Raiders need a lot of help.
Big time. Again, going back to the 25 free agents that they have. And if you can go through the list really quickly and realize that there's not too many of those guys that are coming back. Like I see like 2 or 3 guys that are probably coming back. And then outside of that, it's like, yeah, if they walk, they walk. Not a big deal. So they have a lot of salary cap space, so they'll be able to address some of that in free agency. But for the most part, this is going to be, like I said, a completely turned over roster. every single position the Raiders could use. I mean, it's just that simple, right? I don't think that they'll be drafting a running back early for obvious reasons. They won't be drafting a tight end early for obvious reasons. But outside of that, all bets are off. Outside of that, I mean, really, what other position are they deep in? They're not, right? They're going to get a quarterback early, obviously, right? But there's no other position that the Raiders are deep in. They could use offensive linemen. They could use defensive linemen. They could use safeties. They could do linebackers. They could use corners. They could use everything. Everything. The only thing that they won't be addressing early is tight end, and they won't be addressing running back. That's it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's been so many reports, not even reports, but stories that have been put out saying that the Raiders might go for another running back in the draft, but there's so many holes on defense, and I think they're going to try to fill their defense throughout this draft. And Link mentioned a linebacker. That's a need that I've been like, they need to address this because it's been a need that hasn't been addressed, I feel like, in a couple of years. They brought in some veterans, but there's a lot of good young talent in terms of the linebacker group as well in this draft. And some names that I would probably be looking at is like Anthony Hill Jr. for Texas, who will probably go pretty early, Kyle Lewis from Pittsburgh, and CJ Allen from Georgia as well. So I'm really interested in what they're going to do in the draft. We've talked about the secondary a little bit. Now, you mentioned like Eric Stokes should be a guy that the Raiders should probably bring back because he had a really good season. And then Darian Porter as well. I think he kind of shined a lot of moments as well. He was a rookie, so he was going to get burnt at some time, at some point of the season. But Link, in terms of the players that the Raiders have in the secondary, were you pretty satisfied with what you saw from Eric Stokes and Darian Porter?
Trick question there, sis. When you're talking about a 3-win team, it's really hard to be impressed with anything. I think that when you don't get your number called, and because there really was a lot of juggling with personnel due to injuries and coaching and everything else, it's really hard to ascertain their value and their playing ability. More importantly, I thought a lot of times the DBs, especially the ones that you mentioned, were kind of playing out of position or out of scheme. You ask a zone corner to be a man corner and vice versa. It's asking a lot, especially when you talk about guys being on different levels and improper communication. Now, with that being said, there were times where the defense would play strong enough to keep the Raiders in the game, and there would be times where they just let things down. So, I mean, everyone's under evaluation when it comes to scheme and ideology and what you're hoping to. I think everyone is up for evaluation. I think this entire locker room is up for evaluation. But much to Q's point, you're not going to draft a tight end. You're not going to draft a running back. But everyone else, look, it's fair game because you have a new philosophy coming across the board, offensively, defensively. It'd be interesting to see, what Rob Leonard and this defense, what they want to do, what style they want to play, what are they hoping for. So I think you have to draft and address that accordingly, but it's the flexibility of having many draft choices. It's the flexibility of having cash to spend with free agency that you can address those needs. And I'm hoping that they find a way to keep some guys or keep some of the good players on this team, especially with young, unproven guys in a system that you hope will thrive or they can thrive under. You try to keep them rather than releasing good talent and trying to find somebody new.
I liked what Eric Stokes did. I really did. I thought Eric Stokes did a good job last year in the 1-year prove-it deal. He only missed one game. That was one of the big things that he had to prove is that he could stay healthy. He was a former first-round pick of the Green Bay Packers, but lack of ability or availability, I should say, kind of derailed his career. So he had to get back and show that he could be available. He did do that. The only thing he didn't do is create some turnovers. I would have liked to see him get his hands on the ball a couple times. That didn't happen. Didn't really happen for the Raiders in general, right? They only had 8 interceptions as a team last year. So I guess I'm asking a whole lot there. But I thought that he did a good job. If you could bring him back, that would be, and I'm not saying break the bank, obviously, but you bring him back on a decent deal, that'll help at least have a veteran in that room, right? Because I do believe that they'll address that in the draft as well. And like I said, it's so funny. I go through all these different positions. I'm like, yeah, they'll address that in the draft. Yeah, they'll address that in the draft. Well, hell, they don't have 22 draft picks. You know what I mean? So they can't have everybody. Everybody can't be by way of the draft. So somebody's got to be back in free agency. And I think Stokes would be a good start. Again, don't break the bank for him. But if you can come to a reasonable deal, maybe a 2-year deal, whatever the case may be, similar to what like Jeremy Chin signed a year ago, I'd be fine with that.
All right, and my final question about the combine alone is, Link, you've been through this before, but just on the outside looking in now, because you're able to evaluate players, what do you look for at the combine? Is it more so like the interview? and what the players are saying, or are you actually really looking at what they can do on the field and just their skills?
I'm looking for their personality, because I think if you get invited, especially if it's a limited amount of guys that get invited to the combine, I see more and more of these guys testing for the combine. A lot of these teams, a lot of these guys choosing not to play and say their bowl game so they can begin testing for the combine. I see that. And so the statistics to me aren't necessarily as important as the personality. And of course, the medical evaluation.
Right.
If the guy's coming off of an injury, if he didn't finish the season or whatever, I'm coming to the kid and you're asking this young man, and I shouldn't say kid, but I'm coming to this young man and I'm saying, why didn't you play in your bowl game? I want to know what type of team guy he is.
Yep.
Because I want to know how it affects my locker room. If he comes to me and says, man, I didn't want to go to the Freedom Bowl, whatever, this bowl, I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to get ready for the combine because I'm looking forward to my future. That tells me a little bit about your personality right there, because I want team guys in the locker room. I want guys that are willing to sacrifice. And because the way the NFL is, especially with the CBA, I know that I'm not going to be able to generate this sort of overall, this overall athletic prowess through practice. We don't hit. We barely practice. A lot of it's more based on the mental, and I need you to be ready. I want to see what type of personality this guy has. I want to talk to him. I want to get, hey, tell me a little about yourself. Because the NFL has their infinite resources. Yep. They have former FBI, former police officers. They can look into your background. Now you got guys who are evaluating guys' social media. I want to see what you put out there.
Yep.
So everything becomes a big interview process. That's why I try to tell young men that I'm, around. Look, be careful what you put out there. You can't take it back. It's forever out there on the internet if you put it out there, and you don't want people to think that you're that type of person over and over and over again. They want to get to know you. So I think the interview process and sort of just watching the guys, how they, if they're at the combine, watching what they do, who are they interacting with? What type of banter goes on as their position groups get ready? Just watching. I'm big on body language. That's something that's a key that I might want to bring to my team if I'm evaluating a guy. And I already have the intangibles right there. I know what you can do in the 40. I know what you can do in bench and the high jump and the long jump. I get all that. The interview process is the most important thing for me.
Facts. The interview and the medical. That's what it's all about. The interview and the medical, making sure. And look, they find stuff that you didn't know you had wrong with you. And it's like every year there's one player or two players that's like, oh, well, hold on. This person needs to go and get a little bit further testing on whatever the case may be. Maybe a hamstring injury that was a little bit worse than they originally thought it was. There's always something. So they do a lot when it comes to the medicals here. So that's a big deal. The interview process is obviously a big deal. I like it when the players go to the podiums. We get a chance to, talk to them for a couple minutes, and just kind of get their thoughts on how they're taking this whole process in. And, it's not easy to get to know the person, but you can start to pick up on a few of their tendencies. And there'll be a story. I don't know who it'll be, but there'll be someone at the podium that'll start telling their story of their why and how they got here and what they're doing this for. And you'll be like, man, that their reasoning for being here and their reasoning for putting in all the work that they're putting in will get you. There's always at least one story or two that you're like, wow, I'm blown away by the maturity of that young man, or whatever the case may be. It's always going to I don't know who it's going to be. I can't tell you, but I know it's going to happen. And
I've also been around where coaching staffs had their scouts reach back to guys alma mater, the school he came out of, to ask, even go back to high school. What kind of, if you could find the coach, track him down and say, hey, this is Lincoln Kennedy with the Raiders. What type of kid was Q back in secondary school? What type of was in high school? You know what I mean? What was he a good teammate? What did you notice before he went to Clemson? What did you notice before that? And then also do the same thing for the collegiate coaches. Yep. What type of young man was it? And there are things that you can ascertain from information that you're privy to, whether it's your fixation on grades, what type of grades they got, and what type of class they did, how their overall attendance was. I mean, we now see guys in this current climate with NIL. I think it was told to me that there was one quarterback that went back to school that made a couple $1 million, but didn't attend a damn class the entire season.
Right.
What does that tell you? Does it tell you he's more money hungry than intellectually driven? I mean, it doesn't necessarily translate or transfer, in my opinion, to him on the field if he's a good player, but it does say something about the quality of guy that you're going to bring in your locker room. And based on the position, he might have a certain influence on other guys. Do you want that nastiness to rub off on other guys in your locker room to where they become like him? You never know. These are intangibles that you sort of have to think about when it comes to the evaluation process, because these are things that are going to affect your teams. Now, I've known coaching staffs who drafted all good guys.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great chemistry, good guy in the locker room, a natural born leader. Doesn't necessarily translate to a dominant player on the field.
Right.
What do you do with that?
Character is a big deal for this staff. I can promise you that. This staff, character matters in a major way. And if you go back and look at every dude that was drafted last year, look at their character. Like, you're not hearing a bad word about none of those guys. And Lincoln's right. That doesn't always translate to all of a sudden that's going to be a great football player, but that character does matter. Something that they say in Tampa Bay, and Jason Light actually came out and said it, that they put their big board together and they ranked them all, with the number one guy all the way down to the number whatever guy. And then after they're done with putting their board together, they remove all the D-bags. Their words, not mine. Right. So they take all the D-bags off there. They get all the great football players in there, but then the guys that they don't like their character, they remove them immediately. And if you go back and look at the draft class last year, you'll notice there's not one dude that was drafted that has bad character. Not one.
Yeah, but I also think that it's got to be a little bit of a balance, because I remember when they drafted Cleveland Farrell, just off the fact that he did great in his interview and he just seemed like a great guy. But I was like, how are you going to leave like someone like, Devin White on the board? He was there as well. And even someone like Josh Allen, right?
Funny story about Devin White real quick, and I don't mean to cut you off. Jason Light actually said if he had known Devin White's personality, if he had actually got to know him a little bit more, he wouldn't have drafted him at number 5. Even though that was a guy that I wanted the Raiders to get at number 4, and they did. And obviously they went with Cleve Farrell, like you mentioned. But it's so funny. Tampa Bay went with Devin White, and Jason Light came out and said not too long ago, last year, matter of fact, he said, if I had known Devin White was going to be the guy that he is, I would definitely not have drafted him. That is so funny to me. But again, it goes back to that character conversation.
Yeah, so we'll see what the Raiders do and what happens at the Combine. Of course, Q, you're going to be keeping us posted on everything, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of talk about Maxx Crosby. We're actually going to talk about Maxx Crosby as well. That's coming up on the other side. Keep it locked here on the Locked On Network. You're watching or listening to the Raiders Squad Show. Ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll automatically be entered to win a shot to win a trip to the NBA Finals for 2. That's right, flights, tickets, and the whole experience. If you're already looking at the board and thinking about which team can make a deep run, this is the perfect time to lock in. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, welcome back, Raider Nation. Remember, if you like the content, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. You can also follow us on our social media channels. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see on the screen the ways that you can connect with us. And obviously, right now during the Combine, there's going to be also lots of talk about Maxx Crosby. And, despite the fact that the Raiders have been swarmed with so many questions about who they're going to draft, everyone kind of knows it's Fernando Mendoza. The other conversation has been Maxx Crosby and if he's going to stay with the Raiders. And every national media member is talking about this, but also Shannon, Sharpe, and Chad Ochocinco, whatever you want to call him, Chad Johnson, whatever. They were on Nightcap and they're having a conversation about Maxx Crosby's value. So we'll take a listen to the audio and then we'll get Q and Lick's thoughts on what they believe is Max's value.
Raiders want at least 2 first-round picks and a premium player for any potential Maxx Crosby trade per Adam Schefter.
What player we trading for the Cowboys to the Raiders?
Who y'all want? They're not giving up George Pickens in 2 first-rounders. They're not getting that. The hell?
So you think you're going to be able to keep George Pickens and pay Maxx Crosby too?
Yeah. The cap going up. They're gonna restructure CD. They're gonna restructure Dak. Just those 2 restructures alone is $60 million.
What are they gonna do with Maxx Crosby? What are they gonna do with George Pickens? How long are they gonna play the long game? As far as he's concerned. My Bengals, what are we gonna do with offseason acquisitions? What do you want to do with the draft? My
They
Dolphins.
say, okay, give us T. Higgins and 2 first rounders.
No. Whoa!
Wait, what
wait.
you mean no?
What are my Dolphins going to do at the quarterback position?
I'm talking about your Bengals. What about your Bengals?
No, we good.
We want T. Higgins and 2 first rounders, and we'll trade you Maxx Crosby.
No, we good. We good. I mean, they
You ain't gonna give up T and 2 for Maxx Crosby.
No. With all due respect, no.
Because I think the thing is they're looking at the kind of what Green Bay gave up.
Yeah.
What Green Bay gave up
to get Micah.
Parsons.
Yeah.
If you're Chicago, are you willing to give up DJ Moore a first and a second for Maxx Crosby?
Wait,
Baltimore, would you give up the Rashad Bateman in a first and a second for Maxx Crosby?
It's gonna be nice. It's gonna be nice
Because you got to give up your first round pick.
Yeah.
You're not getting it for anything less than a first, and it's going to be multiple picks. But they said a premium player, and I don't know
now when you say
you got a running
premium,
back, you can't get Henry. They're not giving you Zay Flowers because he's their best receiver. You're not getting Lamar. So I'm just trying to figure out. You're not getting Hamilton.
I need better context on what premium means. When a team says you want a premium player, like what do we talk about?
He's got to be at least a starter and has Pro Bowl potential.
Okay, so essentially in that clip, Chad Ochocinco's like, I don't know if I'd give up a lot for Maxx Crosby. That's essentially what he's saying. And the Raiders want a premium player. When you hear the word premium player, Link, what are your thoughts? And is that a Pro Bowler? Is that a starter?
It should be at least a starter, notable starter, not just someone who's just randomly out there. I think if you're the Raiders, because you have to address so many needs, it should be one that's a premium position to you that you're searching for, whether it's a starting receiver or a starting defensive back or a starting safety. But it's also got to be a high value player. I mean, it's got to be somebody who's already warranted the type of success that puts them in the conversation, even if they're not a Pro Bowler, puts them in a conversation where they play well, consistently well. And then it has to be. I mean, look, in to summarize it all, they're looking for a Micah Parsons deal.
Yeah.
That's the only way they would be worth it. And of course, I don't want Maxx Crosby to go anywhere. He right now he is the identity of the Raiders. I would like to keep him a Raider. I do understand from what I've heard from Max's viewpoint about being in the league for 7 years, all these coaching changes, constant rebuilds, and all the time that he's wasting with his talent and the team that's not going anywhere. So I could see a player of his caliber looking to the other side of the fence and be like, "Ooh, I really might like to be over there." I can see that. Yeah. But is a team, willing to give up that premium? And I don't see that because one, he's coming off of a knee surgery. You don't know what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. So the possibility of getting a premium player in 2 first-round picks, I don't think anybody's going to give that up. I don't know of a team that does that.
I don't see that either. I really don't. 2 first-round picks and a player, that's a little rich to me. Yeah. If a team wants to do it, if they're desperate, okay, cool, sounds good. Whatever the case may be. Again, we don't know what's going to ultimately happen when Maxx Crosby sits down with GM John Spytek, Clint Kubiak, and they talk about the direction that this team is going. I think that Max wants to know a plan. I think that's fine. And what the timeline is. If the timeline matches up for Max, then I'm sure he's probably going to want to stick around. I don't think that he actually wants to go anywhere. I do think that he's a guy who wants to win, though, and he's looking at the window here with the Raiders, and is that window legit for him to actually have a chance to win?
Yeah,
it's going to be a while. It's going to it's obviously it's going to take a couple years, as far as I'm concerned, to build this thing up to be in position for them to even have a chance to try to win. And that's if they hit all the right buttons. So, that's part of the conversation. But the other thing is, when you talking about 2 first-round picks, are you talking about the Seahawks number 32 overall pick? Are you talking about, the Cowboys number 20 pick, right? I mean, there's different ballgame, because look, the Jets aren't doing it. Team that's picking in the top 10 doesn't make any sense to do it. There's only one team that's picking in the top 10 that I can see doing it, and Raider Nation cringed every time I mention it, and that's the Chiefs at number 9, because that's a high draft pick. That's the only reason that I would even say something like that, is because you want to be able to get if you're going to get draft capital, you want to get the best possible draft capital, that you can. If you're getting in the late 20s or 32, like Seattle or whatever, that's might as well be a second round pick. So what are you really getting? So you have to really weigh the options of what you're going to get in. And like I said, the player that comes in, like the Cowboys got Kenny Clark, right? He was a 3-time Pro Bowler when they got him, and they needed to stop the run, according to Jerry. So that's the reason why they got him. All right, well, there's that. You know what I mean? So is it really worth, getting that capital back and getting a player? Is it worth the player that you already have? That's where they got to compare and contrast.
Yeah. And do you guys believe that he's worth a Micah Parsons bag? Like, do you feel like Maxx is worth that, especially the fact that he's coming off an injury? And that's another thing too.
I thought the Micah Parsons bag was really excessive. I thought the Cowboys were desperate in doing what they did, and Green Bay gave them what they wanted. It gave them what Green Bay was willing to play Micah Parsons because he's a game changer and he's a difference maker. He didn't finish out the season, but right now, as a general manager, I can't justify someone who's coming off of a knee injury and me giving away that much of my present and today draft capital and future draft capital of that value, because you never know how that young man's going to come out of that injury. Right.
Exactly. I mean, that's the big thing too. And as much as I really appreciate Maxx, and I think that he's, obviously he's the identity of the Raiders, he doesn't make the Micah Parsons plays consistently. He doesn't make the TJ Watt plays consistently. He's not making the Myles Garrett's plays consistently. I think that's part of his game that he would tell you that he wants to continue to improve, where it's 3rd and long and all of a sudden he's getting a strip sack to get him off the field. He's being that closer. I think that's where he elevates his game, takes it to the next level. There's a lot of really good plays that Maxx makes, but there's some that aren't made that I'd like to see him start making. And look, if we're going to talk about being legendary and being, the best of the best, that's part of it, right? I don't think that that's an unfair criticism. That's part of it, is being able to close the game out when your team needs you the most. And I always go back to Khalil Mack. More times than not, how many times did Khalil Mack make that closing play? How many times did he, come up with a strip sack at the end of the game, or come up with a interception, or come up with something that was a game changer that would help the Raiders win that game? That's Max's next step in his maturation as far as his ability. And again, that's another reason why I don't think he gets those 2 first-round picks and a premium player in return.
Yeah, well, I'm just hoping the Raiders keep Maxx, and he's here for the rebuild, and then the Raiders see some success. But we'll see what happens. I know, Q, you're probably going to get slammed with a bunch of Maxx Crosby questions, and you're going to be on every radio station and TV station talking about Maxx during the combine.
I like Herman Munster's comment in the comment. Appreciate you, Herman Munster. I don't know what he's talking about, but it's cool.
No.
All right, well, speaking of questions and comments, we're going to do that on the other side. So keep it locked here on the Locked On Network. You're watching or listening to the Raiders Squad Show.
Yes.
All right, it's time for questions and comments with Q and Link, and we'll get to Herman's comment in just a moment. But actually, this one coming from a good friend of the show who actually left this not on today's episode on the YouTube chat, but if you are on the YouTube chat, get your questions and comments in. This one is from Jamil, who says, with Pete's commitment to playing older veterans as injuries came up on the like last year, we obviously got minimal tape on who Charles Grant and Caleb Rogers are. With Kubiak coming in as a new head coach, how do you all think he's going to approach evaluating those guys as it relates to free agency and the draft? And if we do, what does that do to the development and opportunity for our 2nd or 3rd round picks? We'll go with you first, Link.
Again, I don't like to use the word development, and you don't know what you have until you use it. Now that you've got a new coaching staff, you've got a new run game coordinator, you've got a new offensive line. Only way you're going to be able to evaluate is practice and padded practices, and you won't have padded practices until training camp.
Right.
I mean, this is what happens when a new coaching staff comes in when you have existing talent. You could turn on the film, you can see what limited you saw from practice, with those 2 guys. You can see what limited plays you saw in games with those 2 guys. But, Pete Carroll, through his evaluation and not playing those guys, you really don't have a lot to go on. So then you have to go back to the college film and evaluate them if they're right for you. But you never know what you have until you put them in there. So whether it's preseason game, whether it's training camp, that becomes your true evaluation period. What you had. Those guys will still be under contract. They'll still be on the roster. You don't need to cut them. You don't need to make any drastic changes. If you add a starter, depending on where that starter, if you add a draft choice or a free agent, depending on where they come in and how much they're worth, well, that probably promotes them obviously to your starting line with pencil on paper, but you don't know until you have a chance to see these guys in action. And with the zone running scheme, it's more based on athleticism than it is overall power. Yep. So you have the ability of having a guy block an area. That's where you come and evaluate. You won't know that until you get them in practice and get them all together.
Yeah, big facts. And the thing I could appreciate about Klint Kubiak is that his opening presser, he said, I can't wait to cut the film on and start to really evaluate these players. Like he said, look, we could sit up here and say everything that we want to say. What we're going to be evaluated on is what we put on film. And that's what he's going to go back and do and evaluate as much as he can. Again, last year's draft class didn't put a whole lot on film anyway, but from what he has, he's definitely going to be breaking down and start to evaluate that and try to get a good understanding, an idea of what they have. But Link's right, until you actually get on the field, get on the grass and put some real practice in and start to understand, this is what I want to do. This is how these players can help me do it. You're really not going to know exactly what you have.
All right, let's go over to at Luffy Senpai 93. Would you trade Maxx to the Eagles for a first round, third round, and Devontae Smith?
I need more.
I think that's fair.
First round, at least a second round, first or second.
First or second. Okay.
Well, think about this. Devontae Adams was traded for a first and a second. So I guess you could put him there and say that you would need a first and a second. But that's what the Raiders gave up, a first and a second round pick to the Green Bay Packers for Devontae Adams. So if you're getting a first and a third and Devontae Smith, I think that it's pretty good, especially with Maxx Crosby being 28, going to be 29 in August. I think you try to get more, Link, and then maybe that's what you settle for. You know what I mean? Like,
I can see that happening, and then negotiating. I can see that happening.
Maybe fall on the bone.
Yeah, I like the Devontae Smith, throwing him into that trade. So that's why I like it. All right, let's go to Warlock 67. Question of these free agents of ours, Carlson, Mostert, White, Starks. Do we bring any of them back?
Most
about Stokes, right? Talking about Stokes.
Yes. Oh, yeah, Stokes.
I was like, Starks, Max Starks.
Do we got Starks?
I would bring back Carlson. I would, I know that he struggled a lot last year. I think that might have been more process than him. Obviously we'll find out, but I think that the way he ended the season was a nice high note. He can drill in a 60-yarder to win the game. That was kind of cool. I believe in Cash Money Carlson. And like I said, I think if you give him maybe a 1 or 2 year deal, obviously not breaking the bank, I think you can still get, some really good quality play out of him. What I'm concerned about when it comes to the kicker is, once you don't have your guy, it's really hard to find the guy. You know what I mean? So that's why I'm kind of hoping that last year was more of that was like an anomaly, like something that's just not supposed to happen. He just had a bad year, as opposed to all of a sudden that's just where he is in his career.
I can definitely see Mostert, Carlson, and Stokes. I think I would like Devin White because he just had a franchise record of tackles last year. I think he tried to find a way to bring all those guys back. But once you see guys play on a high enough level to succeed with your team, I think it's worth the interest to try to possibly put a contract together and say, look, what will it take to keep you? As long as I'm not breaking the bank on a veteran who's probably maybe past their prime, like like a White. But much to Q's point, Carlson has had, it's been pretty good. Had a little bit of an off year last year. That's going to happen for every player. But still a strong leg kicker, as important as kicking is in today's game. I think it comes with value. And of course, I think Mostert, because I do think, but you have to have more than one running back there. As fond as I am of Ashton Genty, there's going to be a time that you need to give him a spell. And I'd much rather have a powerful running back who knows the system, knows the game, has played long enough back there to help out, rather than ushering in someone new and having to train them.
Yeah, and it's going to be an entirely different roster from last season, this season, because there were a lot of guys that signed those 1 year prove-it deals.
Yep.
So it's going to be an entirely different team, which I'm kind of excited about because it's a new era with Klint Kubiak. But nonetheless, that's it for today's episode. And of course, Q will be keeping us posted on everything at the Combine. And so
Q knows ball.
Q knows ball.
It's 25 degrees outside. That's what Q knows.
Yeah,
you have to go outside and no ball. Q, stay inside. That's why they built the dome, man. That's why you got a dome in there, Indianapolis. So you're there.
Yeah, lying, man. Jeez.
And we're all just jealous of where Link is at because it's nice and warm, and Link's getting all that good Phoenix weather in AZ, right? But nonetheless, Raider Nation, we'll be back later in the week. Thanks so much for rocking out with us. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button because it helps the channel grow. Thanks so much for hanging out with this morning, and we'll be back later in the week.